It was supposed to be a routine rescue flight over the frozen mountains of Montana. Just another signal, another mission. But in the forest below, something was wrong. Not broken, not lost. Waiting. The distress call was clean. Too clean. And the K9 reacted before the instruments did. A German shepherd froze mid-step, ears locked, body tense, sensing something no radar could detect. By the time the pilot understood the truth, the signal wasn't asking for help. It was trying to erase her, disguised as an accident, cut off from her own systems, minutes left before the sky became her grave. In the closing silence, one pilot, one K9, and one instinct stood between the truth and a lie meant to disappear forever. Before we begin, tell us where you're watching from. And if you believe quiet courage still exists, don't forget to subscribe. The town of Pinecrest, Montana, slept under a slow, deliberate snowfall. It was the kind of winter night that softened edges and swallowed sound. Streetlights blurred into halos, rooftops bowed under white weight, and the mountains beyond the town limits disappeared into cloud and shadow. At the edge of Pinecrest, where asphalt surrendered to gravel and forest, the Federal Air Rescue hangar hummed quietly, metal walls ticking as they cooled, radio towers blinking red like patient sentries against the dark. Inside, Evelyn Hart sat alone in the cockpit of her helicopter. She was 34, average height, with a build shaped less by gyms and more by repetition. Long hours seated, braced, alert. Her dark brown hair was pulled into a low knot at the base of her neck, not for style but habit, a pilot's way of keeping nothing loose that could distract. Her face carried sharp lines softened by fatigue, high cheekbones, a straight nose, and eyes the color of storm glass, gray-blue, steady, observant. People often described Evelyn as calm. What they meant was contained. She moved with restraint, spoke without excess, and trusted preparation over optimism. That hadn't always been enough. The cockpit smelled faintly of oil and cold metal. Evelyn ran her pre-flight checklist without hurry, fingers precise, voice low inside her helmet. Routine patrol, weather stable, visibility poor but manageable. Just another winter flight. Then the radio crackled, not static, a tone, a clean, sharp alert that cut through the quiet like a blade. Evelyn froze, one hand hovering above the console. The screen blinked once, then populated with data. Emergency signal received. Coordinates, High Ridge National Forest. Signal strength, fluctuating. Source ID, unavailable. Evelyn frowned. No identifier, she murmured. She adjusted the frequency. The signal repeated, precise, evenly spaced, identical in duration. Too perfect. Emergency beacons were messy by nature. They drifted, degraded, stuttered. This one behaved like a metronome. Her pulse ticked faster, not with fear, but recognition. Something about it felt staged. Before she could log the anomaly, a second alert flashed. Priority. Life-threatening. Protocol tightened around her like a harness. She exhaled slowly. Air Rescue 1 acknowledging signal, she said into the mic. The radio answered with silence. No voice, no breath, just the same flawless pulse. Miles away, at a small ground facility bordering the forest, Thor lifted his head. Thor was a German Shepherd K9, 4 years old, large even for his breed, broad-chested, with a powerful neck and long, muscular legs built for endurance. His coat was dense black and tan, winter thick, dusted with frost where he'd been lying near the door. A faint scar traced the ridge of his left ear, a pale seam hidden beneath fur, the only visible reminder of past work. Thor's eyes were amber, intelligent, unsettlingly, focused. They missed very little. He belonged to search and rescue, trained for terrain tracking, avalanche response, and disaster zones. But his past ran deeper. Thor had once been assigned to a private security contractor, trained to detect electronic equipment, weapons residue, and signal interference. That history was why his file was complicated. The moment the radio tower above the station pulsed, Thor rose to his feet, not barking, not whining. He growled low, deep in his chest, a sound of warning, not aggression. His handler, Daniel Reeves, looked up from his desk. Reeves was in his early 40s, lean, with a permanently tired posture, and a beard that never quite filled in along the jaw. A former Army communications specialist, he'd transitioned into K-9 handling after leaving active service. "What is it, boy?" he asked quietly. Thor's ears were locked forward, his body angled toward the radio equipment mounted on the far wall. Another pulse. Thor snarled, a sharp, unmistakable reaction. Reeves stiffened. Thor did not react to radios. Not like this. Once, 2 years ago, Thor had flagged a signal as hostile that turned out to be nothing, a malfunction, a false positive. That single mistake had followed him like a shadow. His tactical assignment was pulled, his handler reassigned, his instincts quietly questioned. Since then, Thor had been flawless. Reeves crossed the room and checked the readouts. "Signal's clean," he muttered. "No interference flagged." Thor growled again, louder. Reeves swallowed. He trusted machines because he'd built them, but he trusted Thor because Thor had saved lives. He keyed the internal line. "Air rescue hangar," Reeves said. "You picking up that beacon too?" Back in the cockpit, Evelyn answered immediately. "Yeah, High Ridge Forest. No ID, perfect repetition." There was a pause on the line. "That's what I'm seeing," Reeves said slowly. "Thor hates it." Evelyn closed her eyes for half a second. A memory rose uninvited. Rain, another forest, another signal, 2 years earlier. She had been younger then, less scarred by consequence, more obedient to procedure. The signal had been weak, inconsistent. Her gut had twisted, telling her something was wrong. But protocol said wait, confirm, don't divert without backup. She had waited. By the time they found the hiker, hypothermia had already won. The man's face still visited her sometimes. Not in dreams, but in quiet moments like this, when decisions balanced on seconds. Evelyn opened her eyes. "I'm lifting," she said. "Evelyn," Reeves started. "I know," she replied. "Log the anomaly. Keep Thor close to the tower. If anything spikes, I want to know." The rotors spun to life, chopping the falling snow into chaos. As the helicopter rose, Pinecrest fell away beneath her, lights dimming, streets narrowing into threads swallowed by white. The mountains, ahead, loomed dark and patient. High Ridge Forest waited. Back at the station, Thor paced. The radio pulsed again. Perfect. Thor's growl deepened, vibrating the floor. Reeves watched him, unease crawling up his spine. "Easy," he whispered, though nothing about this felt easy. Thor stopped pacing and sat, staring at the radio with an intensity that made the air feel tight. Somewhere between the forest and the sky, a call continued to repeat itself. Clean, precise, empty, and both the pilot and the dog felt the same truth settle into their bones. This signal was not asking for help. It was waiting for someone to answer. The helicopter came in low and wrong, fighting a wind that shouldn't have been there. Snow streamed sideways across the windshield, thin needles skating along the glass as Evelyn Hart worked the controls with controlled force. The radio hissed and dipped, the signal strength jumping in erratic steps that didn't match terrain or weather. Her jaw tightened. Interference again. Not a blackout, something more deliberate, like a hand turning a dial just enough to unsettle balance. She brought the aircraft down into a narrow clearing carved between black spruce and lodgepole pine. The skids kissed ice, slid, then caught. The rotor wash flung snow outward in a violent ring, flattening brush and bending branches until the engine wound down and the forest rushed back into itself. Silence followed, heavy, watchful. Evelyn shut the power and sat still for one extra breath, listening past the ringing in her ears. She was aware of every sensation. The cold pressing through the cockpit seals, the faint tremor in her left hand that always came after a difficult descent, the way the forest seemed to absorb sound instead of reflecting it. She stepped out into knee-deep snow and scanned the tree line. No footprints, no broken branches, no flare residue, nothing that matched a distress call. Moments later, the ground team arrived from the access road, 2 snowmobiles and a tracked utility rig grinding to a halt at the edge of the clearing. Daniel Reeves dismounted first, tall and narrow, shoulders hunched against the cold. Behind him came Thor. The German shepherd moved differently out here. His head was low, tail steady, ears pivoting in small, precise adjustments. Frost clung to the guard hairs along his back. He did not rush. He catalogued. Evelyn felt a flicker of relief she didn't allow herself to name. Interference spiked on approach, she said to Reeves, keeping her voice even. Did you get anything new? Reeves shook his head. Tower shows clean. Thor doesn't agree. As if summoned by his name, Thor stopped and lifted his muzzle. He inhaled once, then twice. Deep pulls that drew the cold air into his chest. A low sound rolled out of him, not a growl this time, but a questioning hum, like a warning held just behind the teeth. He turned and walked, not toward the coordinates on Evelyn's tablet, but away from them, angling left along a shallow ravine. Reeves frowned. That's opposite the beacon. Evelyn followed Thor with her eyes. What do you have, boy? Thor didn't look back. He moved with purpose now, paws finding purchase along the crusted snow, body aligned as if pulled by an invisible line. Evelyn felt the familiar tightening under her ribs, the same sensation she'd learned to respect after paying once for ignoring it. We follow, she said. Reeves hesitated, then nodded. He trusted Thor, even with the mark on his file, especially with it. They moved in a staggered line, Thor leading, Evelyn a few steps behind, Reeves covering the rear. The forest closed around them. Snow muted their footfalls, turning movement into suggestion. After 50 yards, the ground began to slope gently upward, the trees thinning just enough to let gray light filter through. Thor stopped again. He lowered his head and circled a patch of snow no larger than a dinner table. He did not dig. He sniffed, short, sharp draws, then sat abruptly, eyes fixed on the ground. Reeves crouched. What is it? Evelyn knelt beside him. She brushed away the top layer of powder with her glove. Beneath it, something dark showed through. Not blood. Oil. A thin sheen, barely visible unless you knew how to look. Thor exhaled through his nose and moved on, veering farther from the SOS coordinates. Why oil? Reeves muttered. Machinery, Evelyn said. Or electronics. They weren't more than 100 yards on when a voice called out from the trees. Hold up! A man stepped into view from behind a stand, of pine. He was in his late 40s, average height, stocky through the middle, wearing a Forest Service green parka dusted with snow. A knit cap sat low on his brow, shadowing eyes that moved quickly, measuring. "This area's restricted," he said. "What are you doing out here?" Reeves straightened. "Search and rescue. Got a distress signal." The man nodded slowly. "Mark Denson, Forest Service Ranger." He gestured vaguely behind him. "There's no one living out here. No camps. No trails that aren't logged." His voice was calm, practiced. The kind of tone meant to settle situations, not escalate them. Evelyn studied him. Denson's boots were new, too clean for a man who claimed to patrol this sector regularly. His gloves were unscuffed. His breath fogged in quick bursts, as if he were working to keep his breathing steady. "Tin hiu kong hop li," he added, slipping into Vietnamese accented English that suggested time spent abroad, or a second, language learned young. "This signal, it doesn't make sense." Thor shifted. The dog's ears snapped forward. His body angled toward Denson, not aggressive, but attentive in a way that tightened the space between them. Thor stepped closer, nose lifting, sampling the air around the ranger's jacket. Denson took a half step back. "Easy," Reeves said, reflexive. Thor ignored him. He inhaled again, then let out a low, vibrating sound that Evelyn felt in her bones. Not threat, recognition. Denson's eyes flicked to the trees. "You're heading the wrong way," he said quickly. "Beacon south." "We know," Evelyn replied. Thor moved past Denson, cutting across the man's path. His nose traced an invisible line along the snow, weaving between trunks with unerring certainty. Denson watched him go, jaw tightening. "I'll check the perimeter," he said. "Make sure no one else is out here." He turned and walked away. Not back toward the access road, but deeper into the forest, taking a route that avoided Thor's path entirely. Evelyn tracked him until the trees swallowed his shape. "You know him?" she asked Reeves. Reeves shook his head. "Not from our briefings." Thor stopped again. This time, he scratched once at the snow with a single paw. Beneath it lay a shallow depression and the faint outline of something rectangular, already reburied. Not a device, at least not anymore. Just the ghost of where one had been. Thor did not search for human scent. He ignored the wind, the trees, the places where a lost hiker might have stumbled. He followed metal, oil, residue that spoke of hands, not bodies. "He's not tracking a person," Reeves said quietly. "No," Evelyn agreed. "He's tracking intent." The radio on her shoulder chirped, then fell silent again. Evelyn looked toward the sky, where low clouds pressed down like a lid. Somewhere behind them, the SOS continued to pulse, patient, perfect, and wrong. Thor turned his head slightly, amber eyes meeting hers for a brief, charged second. Then he faced forward again and moved, pulling them farther from the coordinates and closer to whatever had been planted here on purpose. The forest did not protest. It only watched. The radio spoke back to Evelyn in her own voice. Not all at once, not clearly, just fragments. Half seconds of sound that slipped through the static and returned warped, flattened, delayed by a breath. She stopped walking and lifted her hand, signaling Reeves to hold. Thor froze instantly, muscles locking, one paw lifted mid-step. Evelyn keyed the mic. "Air Rescue 1, ground team at grid." The transmission cut. A second later, the radio hissed and her words came back to her, wrong. Same cadence, same pitch, no background noise. As if the forest itself had learned how to speak like her and was testing the shape of it. Her stomach tightened. "That's a loop," Reeves said quietly. "Closed reflection." Evelyn nodded. She reached into her jacket and pulled a small handheld spectrum analyzer from a side pocket. Standard issue, rarely needed. The display jumped as soon as she powered it on. Signals overlapped in tight bands, folding inward on themselves instead of dispersing outward. Every transmission she made stayed here, bounced, sampled, and returned. "They're not blocking us," she said. "They're collecting." Thor let out a low, warning sound and moved again, angling downslope. The terrain changed subtly. Snow lay thinner here, scoured by wind, revealing dark patches of earth and rock. Thor's nose dropped lower now, his pace slowing into something deliberate and exact. He stopped at a cluster of fallen branches half buried in drift and began to dig. Not frantically, but with precision. Evelyn knelt beside him and brushed snow away with her gloves. Metal gleamed beneath the ice. Reeves swore under his breath. The device was old, military old. A matte black housing scarred by use, edges dulled, serial numbers ground away. Antennas collapsed inward like broken limbs. It had been wrapped in thermal fabric and packed with foam scavenged from shipping crates, then buried just deep enough to evade casual detection. "A jammer," Reeves said. "But not active." "Not anymore," Evelyn replied. "It did its job." She felt the shape of the truth settle, heavy and undeniable. This signal wasn't meant to bring help. It was meant to bring her. Thor circled the device once, sniffed again, then moved on. He ignored the SOS direction entirely now. His attention tracked a trail that curved away from the buried jammer, following faint residues. Oil, plastic, burned insulation, things that carried intention, but no heartbeat. As they moved, Evelyn's mind slid backward, uninvited. 2 years ago, she'd been a junior investigator attached to an interagency task force reviewing environmental violations. She hadn't expected much: paperwork, reports, quiet misconduct, but one file had refused to sit still. High Ridge Extraction Initiative. The name had sounded clean. Restoration-based mining. Limited impact. Community offsets. The documents were immaculate, too immaculate. Evelyn had noticed discrepancies in transport logs, weight records that didn't match yield estimates, night movements where there should have been none. She'd filed a report, pushed for a deeper audit. The project was shut down 3 weeks later. Officially, it was due to economic infeasibility. Unofficially, no one thanked her. Thor stopped abruptly at the edge of a shallow ravine. The wind funneled through here, carrying scent farther than it should. He lowered his head and sniffed, then turned his gaze upslope toward a stand of trees. Someone was there. "Hold," Evelyn whispered. A figure emerged cautiously from behind the trunks, a woman this time. She was in her mid-30s, tall and slim, wrapped in a gray insulated coat that hung loose on her frame. Her dark hair was braided tightly down her back, practical, unmoving. She moved carefully, testing each step before committing weight, as if the forest were something she'd learned not to trust all at once. "Don't shoot," she said, hands visible, voice steady but low. Evelyn relaxed a fraction. "We're not armed," the woman nodded once. "Good." She introduced herself as Sarah Calder. Sarah was a geospatial analyst contracted through a university research group, remote sensing, land use modeling, satellite interpretation. Her face was narrow, almost severe, with deep-set brown eyes that missed nothing. There was a guardedness to her posture, a habit of standing slightly angled away from others, learned not from fear, but from disappointment. "I was mapping signal anomalies," Sarah said. "The forest here behaves selectively." She glanced at the buried device. Her jaw tightened. That confirms it. Reeves studied her. You just happened to be nearby? Sarah met his gaze without flinching. I live 2 towns over. My work doesn't make me popular. Evelyn believed her. Sarah had the look of someone who'd learned to expect resistance. Someone who'd spoken up once too often and paid for it in quiet ways. Contracts not renewed, calls not returned, invitations rescinded. What are they recording? Evelyn asked. Sarah exhaled slowly. Voices, stress markers, patterns. They feed it into behavioral filters, figure out who panics, who hesitates, who sounds convincing when asking for help. Reeves swore again. They're fishing. No, Evelyn said. They're hunting. Thor moved between them, ears high, attention fixed on Sarah, not threatening, but alert. Sarah noticed and crouched slightly, offering the back of her glove for him to sniff. Thor leaned in, sampled her scent, then accepted her presence without comment. That's a good dog, Sarah said quietly. He used to belong to a private security firm, Reeves said. Before us. Sarah's eyes flicked to Thor, then back to Evelyn. That tracks. She pulled a folded tablet from her coat and powered it on, shielding the screen from the wind. Satellite overlays bloomed into Team view, terrain, signal heat maps, time-stamped anomalies. This company, she said, highlighting a logo buried in metadata, provided perimeter security for High Ridge during extraction. They also ran K-9 programs, electronic countermeasures, behavioral profiling. Evelyn stared at the name. She remembered it now, buried in footnotes, subcontracted, untouchable. Thor had come from there. Thor flagged a signal once, Reeves said, voice tight. They said he was wrong. Sarah shook her head. Or inconvenient. Silence settled between them, thick with implication. The radio on Evelyn's shoulder chirped again, then went dead. Evelyn didn't answer it. She looked at the forest, the slopes, the ravines. The way sound seemed to stop a few feet short of travel, like the air itself had been taught to listen inward instead of outward. I'm not the rescuer, she said slowly. I'm the test subject. Sarah nodded. Or the liability. Thor let out a single, low breath and moved forward, continuing the trail. Whatever had been planted here, whatever had been taken apart and hidden again, it wasn't finished. Evelyn adjusted her pack and followed. Behind them, the SOS continued to pulse, perfect and patient, waiting for a voice that would never answer again. The first shot was not meant to kill. Evelyn knew that before the sound fully reached her ears. It cracked through the valley like a snapped branch magnified by distance, followed by the unmistakable metallic whine of something passing too close to the helicopter's tail. The aircraft shuddered, not from impact, but from sudden turbulence as she instinctively dipped altitude. Snow exploded upward from the rotor wash, the sky collapsing into white chaos. Warning shot, Reeves shouted over the engine noise. Evelyn didn't answer. Her hands were already moving, fingers tight on the controls as the instrument panel flickered. The radio screamed with static, then went dead entirely, as if someone had pinched the air itself. She angled the nose away from the open valley and toward the darker fold of terrain to the east. Another crack, closer this time. The sound echoed late, distorted by trees and rock. They want us down, Sarah said, voice calm but thin. She had braced, herself against the cabin frame, knuckles pale beneath her gloves. Her eyes tracked the slope lines below, already calculating where sound would travel and where it would die. Evelyn saw it too, a narrow cut in the land, a crease where the forest pinched inward and the ground dropped sharply. A ravine, risky, concealing, she committed. The helicopter sank fast, skids clipping the tops of young pines before slamming into a shelf of hard-packed snow. The impact threw them forward. Harnesses bit into shoulders. The engine howled once in protest before Evelyn killed the power. Silence rushed in, thick and absolute, broken only by the ticking of cooling metal. "Move," Evelyn said. Thor was already gone. The German Shepherd burst from the open side door before the rotors had fully stilled, hitting the snow at a dead run. His body flowed downhill with controlled speed, tail low, ears flattened back to reduce silhouette. He did not look behind him. He did not wait. "Follow him," Reeves said, unnecessary. They spilled from the helicopter into the ravine's shadow. The air felt different here, colder, denser, carrying sound upward instead of outward. Thor cut left, then right, then vanished briefly behind a wall of rock before reappearing below, motioning with his whole body rather than his head. Evelyn slid down after him, boots skidding, shoulder catching rock. Pain flared and passed. Above them, voices carried, not shouting, coordinated, measured. A group emerged along the ridgeline, 5 figures spaced with professional distance between them. They wore rescue jackets in muted orange and gray, reflective strips dulled with grime. From a distance, they looked legitimate. Up close, the lie showed itself in the details. Boots too uniform, movements too practiced, radios cradled rather than clipped. One of them lifted a device the size of a brick and toggled a switch. The air pressed inward. Evelyn felt it in her teeth before she saw the indicator lights go, dark on her emergency beacon. Signal lock. "Fake rescue," Sarah whispered. "Private security." Thor slowed at the base of the ravine and pressed himself into shadow, chest heaving once before settling. He turned his head toward the ridge, eyes burning with a recognition that was not fear. One of the men started down the slope, a tall figure with squared shoulders and a deliberate gait. He moved like someone used to being watched and deciding not to care. His beard was trimmed close, flecked with gray, his parka marked with an old unit patch half removed. When his gaze fell on Thor, he stopped. The pause was small, almost nothing. Thor knew him. The man's name surfaced unbidden in the dog's memory. Caleb Morrow, former lead handler. Voice once calm, hands once precise. The one who had taught Thor to hold, to wait, to measure distance not in steps, but in outcomes. Morrow's eyes widened a fraction. His mouth tightened. "Thor," he said softly, as if speaking the name, might pull the past into alignment. Thor did not advance. He did not growl. He stood, still as cut stone, blocking the narrow exit from the ravine with his body. His tail remained low, not tucked. His breathing slowed. Morrow lifted a hand, palm out. "Easy, boy." Behind him, one of the others adjusted the signal lock device. Another scanned the ravine with a rifle held low, barrel angled just enough to be honest. Evelyn felt the moment stretch thin. This was the second they were waiting for. Thor's stillness unsettled them more than movement would have. Morrow hesitated again. Longer this time. The handler in him surfaced, overriding the operator. "Hold," he said to his team, voice sharper now. That was all Evelyn needed. She moved from cover in a smooth, violent line, bringing her sidearm up with both hands. The crack of her shot tore the quiet open, not at a body, but at the device in the operator's hands. Plastic shattered. Sparks flared and died. The pressure in, the air released like a breath held too long. Thor surged. Not at Morrow. Not to kill. He slammed into the rifleman's legs, a controlled strike that took the man off balance and buried him in snow. Thor's jaws closed on a sleeve, fabric only, holding just long enough to communicate certainty. The man screamed anyway, fear finding volume where bravado had lived. Morrow shouted. Too late. Reeves tackled another figure from the side, driving them into the ravine wall. Sarah ducked low, moving with quick, economical steps that spoke of someone who had learned to survive by not being where danger expected her to be. Evelyn kept her weapon trained, breath steady, eyes locked on Morrow. He raised both hands slowly. You don't understand, he said. This was supposed to be clean. Thor released the sleeve and stepped back at Evelyn's word. He stood between her and Morrow, body angled, ready but restrained. Stand down, Evelyn said. Now. Morrow's gaze flicked to Thor, regret cutting through calculation. You were always too smart, he murmured. Then his shoulders sagged, a fraction. He lowered his weapon and let it fall into the snow. The others froze. Without the signal lock, their coordination frayed. One bolted upslope, another dropped to his knees, hands raised. Evelyn did not pursue. She backed into the ravine, keeping Thor close, Reeves and Sarah flanking. Snow fell harder now, erasing edges, swallowing evidence. Above them, the forest absorbed the chaos with indifferent patience. They withdrew deeper into the cut, where sound bent and disappeared. Only when the ridgeline emptied did Evelyn allow herself a single breath of relief. Thor pressed briefly against her leg, a grounding touch, then moved forward again, ears up, body aligned with the path ahead. The sky had turned against them. The forest had not. They did not run far. The ravine widened into a bowl of wind-scoured snow where the trees stood farther apart, their trunks black and wet like old wounds. The forest here carried sound strangely. Every step seemed louder than it should be, every breath a small betrayal. Evelyn slowed, raising a fist. Reeves and Sarah mirrored her without comment. Thor stopped at once. Ahead, the ground dipped and rose again toward a low rock shelf. Beyond it, faint lights flickered. Headlamps, disciplined and steady, arranged in a shallow arc. Not searchers, not panicked. A perimeter. They're setting a box, Reeves murmured. Thor's ears rotated, mapping the space. His body angled not toward the lights, but toward a darker shape at their center. A man stood there apart from the others, posture relaxed, hands loose at his sides. He was tall, late 40s, with a narrow face and a calm that did not belong in a storm. His coat was unmarked, tailored even, as if he'd dressed for an office, before stepping into the snow. When he spoke, his voice carried without effort. Evelyn Hart, he called. We can end this cleanly. She recognized the tone, authority polished by repetition, the kind that expected compliance because it had always received it. Thor moved first. He did not charge. He advanced at a measured pace until he stood between the man and the others, body squared, chest broad, head level. His tail remained low and still. This was not threat. This was boundary. The man's eyes dropped to Thor, then lifted again. A smile ghosted across his mouth, thin and humorless. Good dog, he said. Still remembers his training. Thor did not blink. Step back, Evelyn said. Hands where I can see them. The man raised one hand, palm outward, the other still loose at his side. Name's Evan Cross, he said. I coordinate risk. Accidents. This was meant to be an accident. Sarah stiffened beside Evelyn. She knew the type, the ones who spoke, in euphemism because it kept their hands clean. "Say it," Evelyn said. On record. Cross tilted his head. Snow settled on his shoulders and did not melt. "A crash," he said evenly. "No witnesses, no heroics. The system mourns, the story closes." Thor's lips lifted just enough to show teeth. Cross noticed. His gaze flicked to the flanks where his people waited, fingers near triggers. He hesitated. Just a fraction. The dog's stillness unsettled him. He took a breath. "It wasn't personal," he added, almost gently. "You filed a report. Reports create risk." Evelyn reached down and lifted the damaged jammer they'd taken earlier, the casing cracked but intact. She thumbed it on. The spectrum lights danced and settled. "Repeat it," she said. Cross's eyes narrowed. He saw the device, saw the risk shift. "You don't have coverage," he said. "I don't need it," she replied. "I need your voice." A rifle barked from the left. Thor moved. Tsaik's shot tore the air and found fur and muscle as Thor launched sideways into Evelyn, driving her down into the snow. Pain flared, hot and immediate, where the round grazed his shoulder. He did not yelp. He landed, rolled, and came up between her and the lights again, breath ragged once, then controlled. "Thor!" Evelyn dropped to her knees without thinking, pulling off her helmet and letting it fall into the snow. She pressed a hand to his shoulder. Blood seeped through her glove, dark against white. He leaned into her, a brief, grounding pressure, then turned back to the threat. "Stand down!" Reeves shouted. Cross lifted his other hand sharply. "Hold!" The order cut through the noise. His people froze. Thor stood his ground, injured but immovable. The line was drawn in fur and bone and will. Cross exhaled. "You see," he said quietly. "This is why animals complicate things." Evelyn raised the jammer's mic, hands steady despite the red on her gloves. "Say it," she said again. Cross looked at Thor, then at Evelyn. Something old and tired moved behind his eyes. "A staged distress," he said. "A controlled descent. You disappear. No witnesses. No hero." The jammer's lights flared as it recorded. A voice broke from the trees behind them. "Stop!" Mark Denson stepped into view, hands raised. He looked smaller now, shoulders hunched, parka stained with snow and oil. His face was drawn, eyes rimmed red from cold or lack of sleep. "I didn't want this," he said. "They made me route the permits, the access, the logs." Cross's jaw tightened. "Mark, they threatened my daughter," Denson said, words tumbling out. "School, records. They said it would be clean." Sarah moved closer, eyes sharp. She had her phone out, recording. "Names," she said. "Dates." Denson swallowed. "I have files," he said. "Internal messages, payment trails." Cross looked at the snow, calculating. Too late. The jammer chirped, signal unlocked. A distant thrum rose from the south, faint at first, then unmistakable. "Rotor blades, support inbound." Cross laughed once, short and bitter. "You got your heroics after all." Evelyn didn't answer. She knelt fully now, both knees in the snow, helmet forgotten. She pressed her forehead briefly to Thor's, breath fogging between them. "Stay with me," she whispered. Thor's tail thumped once. He held, light swept the bowl as the support helicopter crested the ridge, sound scattering and returning distorted. Cross's people stepped back, weapons lowering. Reeves moved in, cuffing Cross with practiced efficiency. Denson sank to his knees, sobbing once before straightening, resolve hardening, as if confession had cost him everything and freed him all the same. Evelyn stayed where she was, hands on Thor, snow falling thicker around them. For the first time since this began, she allowed herself to stop. The forest watched and did not interfere. The snow stopped falling sometime before dawn. It did not announce itself. It simply eased, thinning into a pale mist that drifted away from the treetops and left the forest exposed, quiet, exhausted, and honest in the weak light of morning. The bowl where everything had broken open looked smaller now, less theatrical. Just trees, rock, and the marks of boots that would soon vanish. Federal vehicles arrived with the daylight. They came without sirens, without urgency, performed for cameras. Men and women stepped out in dark coats, movements efficient, voices low. Evidence was catalogued, statements were taken, devices were bagged and tagged. The stage distress beacon was shut down for good, its perfect pulse silenced by procedure and paper. Evelyn stood apart while it happened, hands buried in borrowed gloves, watching Thor as a veterinary tech cleaned and wrapped his shoulder. He sat patiently, ears relaxed, amber eyes following her whenever she moved. The wound was shallow, painful, but clean. He would heal. "You're lucky," the tech said, offering a small smile. "Another inch and we'd be talking about surgery." Thor accepted a treat without ceremony and leaned subtly toward Evelyn when she stepped closer. She knelt and rested her forehead against his neck, breathing him in. Fur, antiseptic, cold air. Gratitude pressed tight behind her ribs, sharp enough to ache. By mid-morning, the truth was already moving faster than the snowmelt would. The recordings Evelyn had captured traveled up channels that did not bend easily. The confession, the jammer logs, Sarah's satellite overlays, Mark Denson's files, messages, payment trails, threats written in language that tried to sound bureaucratic and failed. The private security firm that had once hidden behind subcontractors and euphemism found itself named aloud. Warrants followed. Offices were sealed. Bank accounts froze. People who had spoken carefully for years learned how thin, careful words became under oath. Evelyn was called to a briefing room in Helena 3 days later. The room was glass and steel, too bright after the forest. Officials sat across from her, men and women with tidy haircuts and measured expressions. They thanked her, commended her composure, cited her decisive action under extraordinary circumstances. They offered her a promotion, a desk, oversight, authority. Evelyn listened, hands folded, face neutral. When they finished, she shook her head once. "I'll take the rank," she said, "not the chair." There was a pause. Someone smiled, someone frowned. She continued, calm and certain. "I belong in the air," no one argued. Thor's review took longer. Files were reopened, assessments reevaluated. The single false alert that had haunted his record was examined under new light. Context was added, motive revealed. The conclusion shifted quietly but decisively. Thor was cleared, not just reinstated, but recognized. He stood on the hangar floor, the day it became official, posture steady, tail low, accepting the attention with patient dignity. A small ceremony followed. No speeches worth remembering, just hands-on fur and eyes that understood what it meant to have your name put back where it belonged. Sarah attended, standing near the back. She had changed little in a year, still tall and slim, still observant, still angled slightly away from crowds. But something in her posture had softened. Her work had been vindicated, her contracts renewed. She had learned, slowly, to trust that telling the truth could sometimes change the shape of things. "You stayed," she said to Evelyn afterward. Evelyn nodded. "So did you." A year passed. The The K-9 air rescue program launched without fanfare. It began with a single helicopter, refitted for coordination. Extra harness points, modified comms, reinforced flooring. On its side, just below the cockpit window, a new emblem was painted. A stylized rotor blade intersected by a dog's paw. Thor was the first. He learned the rhythm of the aircraft quickly. The vibrations, the pitch changes, the way wind spoke through metal. He moved with confidence inside the cabin, braced during ascent, alert during approach. On the ground, he worked as he always had, but now with the sky as his partner. Evelyn trained with him every day. They learned each other's timing. Her hand signals became his cues. His stillness became her warning. Between them grew a language without words, shaped by trust and repetition, and the shared memory of a forest that had tried to lie. The call came on a clear spring morning. Lost hikers, late thaw, steep terrain, routine. Evelyn smiled as she ran her checklist, sunlight flooding the hangar. Thor waited by the door, ears up, body ready but calm. As the helicopter lifted, the town fell away below them, roads threading through green, rivers breaking free of ice. The mountains ahead were sharp and honest, their shadows clean. Thor stood and looked. Down through the open door, ears high, reading the land. Evelyn glanced back at him and felt something ease inside her that she hadn't known was still tight. "Clear skies, partner," she said. The helicopter climbed, steady and sure, carrying them toward the work they had chosen, and the quiet understanding that sometimes, after the longest nights, the sky does clear. Sometimes the greatest dangers do not announce themselves with noise or force. They arrive quietly, disguised as routine, hidden inside systems we are taught to trust. This story is not really about a helicopter, a forest, or a K-9. It is about discernment, about the moments when something feels wrong, even when everything looks right. In everyday life, most of us will never face gunfire in the snow or a signal meant to erase us. But we face smaller tests all the time. A voice we ignore, a truth we delay, a warning we explain away because listening would be inconvenient. Sometimes God does not speak through thunder or miracles that stop the world. Sometimes He speaks through instinct, through conscience, through the quiet loyalty of someone or something placed beside us at exactly the right moment. Evelyn listened when it would have been easier not to. Thor held the line when retreat would have been safer. And because they did, a lie lost its power and the truth came into the light. If this story touched you, share it with someone who might need hope today. Leave a comment and tell us where you are watching from. We read them all. If you believe that courage still matters, that loyalty still protects, and that quiet miracles still happen, consider subscribing to the channel so you do not miss stories like this. And if you would like to, comment Amen. Not as a word, but as a reminder that we are never alone when we choose what is right. May God watch over you and your loved ones. May He place guardians on your path when danger draws near. May He give you wisdom to recognize truth, courage to act on it, and peace when the storm passes. Clear skies.